Welcome to this episode of Silicon Bites, and today we're talking about the demographic time bomb that is unfolding in Russia, and there are a number of factors contributing to this, including, of course, the war. We ask the question, how many? How many people's lives have been wasted, ruined, wrecked by Putin's pointless war, by his limitless ego and ambition? Before we jump into that, thank you to everybody who supports the channel, everyone who buys me coffee, becomes a patron, shares, likes, and of course, who's subscribed to the channel. That's especially important this week as we are heading back to Ukraine once more to record more interviews and share with you stories of an extraordinary, resilient nation which is coming under terrible and terrifying attack, which of course is escalating day by day, unfortunately. Let's jump into the episode. Russia's demographic reckoning is going to be brutal. This is a story too urgent to ignore. We'll explore how Putin's catastrophic war, fully enabled by the Russian people, his authoritarian secrecy and a collapsing birth rate are intersecting to redefine the Russian state and cast a grim shadow over its future. The Russian Empire is an historical anachronism which may not survive in its current form because of this demographic crisis. Let's dive in. Russia's official statistics bureau Rosstat abruptly stopped publishing monthly demographic data as of March 2025. Since March 2025, there's been virtually no publicly available demographic data in Russia, wrote demographer Alexei Raksha, noting that this was a clear sign of failed demographic policy at the regional level. That was reported by the Moscow Times. Bloomberg and the Moscow Times also reported the blackout includes mortality, birth rates, regional breakdowns, data normally published without delay. The blackout isn't routine. It's very strategic, however. Putin does not want full scale of Russia's human losses to be understood by the population, allowing some to infer the impact on the economy and society of his pointless and profligate war. The Institute for the Study of War interprets it bluntly. It's meant to obscure the Russian military's high personnel loss rates, says the Moscow Times. The Kremlin is sanitizing numbers, likely to prevent public outrage and maintain wartime mobilization efforts unchallenged. Would the knowledge of these stats trigger a popular uprising or even protests? No, that is vanishingly unlikely, but it would probably tarnish Putin's reputation irretrievably for some and set the stage for a denunciation of him and his legacy after his inevitable demise. Guessing the true cost of the war and estimating Russian casualties is not an easy task, especially as so many foreign correspondents and journalists are no longer in the country. How are estimations being made when the state won't tell the truth? Mediazona and Meduza, using name compilations and probate registry data, estimate 111,000 to 120,000 soldiers killed by mid-2024, with a steep upward trend. That was also covered in The Guardian. By February 2025, there are 138,500 excess male deaths aged 20 to 54. Highly likely that these are wartime losses. This was reported by the New Eurasian Strategies Center. CSIS places overall casualties near 1 million, that is dead and wounded, with 250,000 killed, marking an unprecedented attritional crisis for modern Russia. The Guardian emphasizes Russian fatalities are estimated to be 5 times higher than the combined death toll from all of Russia and the Soviet Union's wars between the end of World War II and 2022. A US Congress hearing suggested up to 120,000 deaths and 170,000 injuries by late 2023. That comes from congress.gov. But with intensifying hostilities and the adoption of meat wave assaults on Ukrainian lines with absolutely no regard of the human cost, the daily mortality rate has been steadily rising through 2024 and 2025. It's been suggested that the rumored summer offensive by Russia, Putin's last throw of the dice, will spike this death rate up still further. The Institute for National Security Studies projects nearly 950,000 casualties, including over 250,000 dead by the summer of 2025. This isn't just a theory or Western propaganda and cope. It's a democide on an industrial scale, the intentional erasure of an entire generation of Russian males, and the regime is seeking to hide it. From fear, embarrassment, shame, probably none of these. Likely it's only from a determination to press on, irrespective of the cost imposed on life, limb, resources, and economy. Putin will have war. This comes in parallel to another compelling reason to hide the stats on the part of Russia's regime, a demographic time bomb from falling birth rates. Loss of soldiers is just one side of the ledger. Russia's birth rate is collapsing. Rosstat recorded 90,500 births in February 2025. That's the lowest monthly total in 200 years. This was reported by the Times and the Moscow Times. Kiev Post quotes Russia: birth rates fell by 6 to 7% in March and by 3 to 4% in February. He calls the current trend the worst since the 18th century in Russia. By the end of 2024, Russia had lost about 600,000 more deaths than births, a 20% increase in the excess death rate compared to the previous year, says the Kiev Post. UN projections anticipate a drop from 146 million estimated population in 2022 to roughly 136 million by 2050. That's reported by Wikipedia. But the numbers could turn out to be far, far worse if Putin is able to stretch the war out for a few more years. And of course, there are persistent rumors that this population data is not particularly accurate in the first place, and various tricks may be used to inflate it to make Russia's population look larger than it is in reality. Russia is not just shrinking, it's also aging fast, from a median age of 32 in 1990 to 40.3 today. More than 16% of the population are over 65, according to Wikipedia. Why are birth rates collapsing even deeper? Well, a militaristic, kleptocratic state erodes public trust and economic stability. Women facing skyrocketing uncertainty delay having children. This is entirely logical. At least the more intelligent and thoughtful part of the population will do that. Ukraine's Kiev Post signals a brain and youth drain. 500,000 to 1.5 million Russians have fled, young, active people, often of reproductive age. Kiev Post. The overlap with Kremlin's ideology is stark. Authoritarianism plus corruption equals fear. By hiring foreign labor as well from India, North Korea, African countries, Russia is acknowledging its own demographic void and is creating a potential social time bomb in a society where systemic racism has never been dealt with or actively discouraged by the government as it has been in the West. This is exemplified by the case that appeared on Russian opposition channel TV Rain last week of an African-American teacher that moved to Moscow to apparently escape the hate and oppression she claimed was rife in the US. She made some propaganda videos about how gloriously free Russia is and may well have been paid for those appearances. Fast forward a few years, and she has been the subject of harassment by her violent and prejudiced Russian neighbors, the subject of verbal and physical abuse. She claims authorities and the police have shown no interest in following up, investigating the neighbors, or of extending her any protections whatsoever. Now, the fact Russia is drafting in hundreds of thousands of migrants, some from former colonial territories in Central Asia and other countries, this has the potential for an incendiary racial confrontation. Analysts note imbalances. The Far East is depopulating. Urban centres are hollowing out. The result, a nation with fewer children, fewer working age adults, and a future workforce falling behind. And what does this mean for Russia's future? Well, the implications are staggering. Military draft pools shrink. Continued heavy casualties accelerate a cycle of obligatory mobilization, shirking, repression, and military inefficiency. Trained soldiers are lost in nonsensical operations, and new recruits are barely trained at all. Russia has reverted to being a security state, harsher, less tolerant, and more punitive than at any time since the death of Stalin. Repression bursts through. The brutality of life within the Russian army both intensifies and becomes more apparent to more of the population. Conscription abuses multiply in order to get the number of bodies they require for the inhumane assaults on Ukrainian front lines. And together with this, the Kremlin's narrative of invincibility begins to crack. The economy splutters and falters. There are fewer workers, fewer consumers, fewer innovators. Russia's GDP growth will decelerate. Inflation will worsen. Pension burdens will skyrocket. Add to that the increasing desperation of the regime for resources to power the war, and, of course, greater paranoia about who is loyal and who is not. This is leading to a spiral of appropriations of businesses to burn them up in the war or to hand them over to more brutal and insistent loyalists. Note these processes have nothing to do with economic logic, and businesses are not granted to those who are best qualified to run them for profit. It's far more likely than such an environment, the more rapacious and less competent people will rise to the top. They will strip these businesses for assets and destroy any potential they have for the future. The process of appropriation also disadvantages innovators, business people within society, eroding the economy in the present and, of course, destroying its future potential for growth. It also creates another question mark for people thinking of having children. Why do that if there are no fair, legal means to earn money and accumulate resources to create a future for your offspring? In terms of geopolitics as well, a weaker Russia might destabilize regions within its perceived sphere of influence or provoke internal fragmentation. Will elites stay loyal? Will this lead to political rupture, or will Putin's regime survive on fear alone? Well, of course, this policy of using fear to hold Russia together, this too will impact on birth rates. This isn't abstract. It's a moral and political crisis. A demographic collapse obscured by state censorship is slowly dismantling Russia from within. Putin's war in Ukraine isn't merely about territorial aggression, it's demographic genocide against his own people, and especially disadvantaging the most vital generations of Russians, those most likely to create rather than destroy. That loss will echo for decades to come. This war targets not just Ukrainian sovereignty, but Russia's future itself. For every coffin, every village left empty, these represent also children that will never be born. Like a demented Egyptian pharaoh, Putin is not just taking his direct servants and pets to the grave with him, but in a slow, painful process of aging and dying, he's taking the whole of Russia down with him too, down to a swampy tomb that will engulf the entire empire and its peoples.